Hello and welcome to Catholic Answers Live. I am Cy Kellett, your host. Delighted to be here with you. 2 hours of Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin this hour. But it's the internet version. All the questions have come to us via the internet. People ask Jimmy a lot of different things, from the mundane to the wildly interesting, sometimes obscure, and often mysterious, because of Jimmy Akin's mysterious world and Jimmy's reputation for taking all questions and taking them seriously. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers and the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Hello, Jimmy Akin.
Very hello, Cyril Kellett. How are you doing today?
Oh, very hello. I'm very well. Thank you very much. Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, maybe you should for the 4 people who listen who don't know what that is, maybe you could give us the general description of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World.
Sure. So it's an audio and video podcast where every week we look at a mysterious subject. The mysteries come in all different flavors. Some of them are scientific mysteries. Some of them are historical mysteries. Some of them relate to true crime. Some of them relate to the paranormal. UFOs and Bigfoot are in there, religious mysteries, all kinds of different mysteries. And we look at them from the twin perspectives of faith and reason. So after we give the background to the mystery and what's claimed about it, we then look at it and say, okay, what would reason tell us about this mystery? And then what would the faith tell us about this mystery? And unlike a lot of mystery shows, we don't just try to generate wonder in the audience and imagine what if. Instead, we actually try to solve the mysteries to the extent that that's possible.
You can find it at mysterious.fm. Check out mysterious.fm. And lots of families have found it a fun family activity. And among families and other listeners, it has become one of the most popular documentary podcasts in the United States. So check it out, mysterious.fm. Do you think that the type of questions you get on this show have been affected by the fact that you do Mysterious World?
Very definitely. There's some bleed through between the two shows. Here on Catholic Answers Live, we sometimes do weird question shows, where people ask deliberately weird questions, and then I use those for occasional episodes on Mysterious World. But then also Mysterious World listeners know I know about these areas, and so they ask questions of that nature on Catholic Answers Live, and we'll have a few of those today.
All right, I'm going to be tempted to give out the number, but I'm going to try to resist the temptation because it's an internet open forum. Lots and lots of great questions for Jimmy, and we'll start with Samantha's question. Samantha asks this, Jimmy: what are your thoughts on the prophecy of the angelic Pope and the great Catholic monarch?
Okay, so first we should probably explain what these are. These are concepts that are reported to have been talked about by various Catholic visionaries a few centuries ago. The angelic Pope was going to be a really good reformer Pope who was going to, make stuff in the church right, the way it ought to be. And the Catholic monarch was going to be a European leader who was a king, who was very powerful, and who was going to be a devout Catholic and really make stuff in the secular sphere in Europe run the way it ought to. So it's kind of a tag team, these two great figures, the angelic Pope and the Catholic monarch. And, at the time, obviously we still have popes, but at the time that these prophecies were being given or reportedly given, there's always a question with some of these older things about, is this, historically accurate that this person actually claimed this? Because a lot of times you don't see them citing primary sources. But monarchs were powerful in Europe. And so it would be logical to think in terms of, if we're going to have a big reform in society and things are going to go back to the way they ought to be, then you would want a pope and a powerful monarch leading that effort. So that's kind of what these concepts are. And at least if you read modern documents that cover prophecies allegedly given, say between the 1600s or the 1500s and the 1800s, you do find, these claims. However, these claims are dependent on the idea of a strong monarchy. And that's no longer really part of European culture.
Hmm.
There are countries like France that don't even have a monarch. There are and Germany, neither of them has a king. There are other countries that do, like, England, for example, and some of the Scandinavian countries, but their monarchs are weak by historical terms. They are not absolute monarchs, and they're not really running the show. They're kind of figureheads. They don't give orders that people have to follow in the great majority of circumstances. Instead, parliamentary government has become the norm. And there's even, on the continent these days, there's even a kind of super parliament for the European Union. And I don't foresee a return of powerful monarchies happening anytime soon.
Hmm.
Um, there'd have to be a massive cultural and political upheaval in Europe to see a resurgence of strong monarchies. And so I would tend to see these prophecies as having been disconfirmed by historical events, if they were given at all. I mean, I'm sure in some cases they were, but in other cases, a prophecy may have been falsely attributed to a seer. And so for those that were actually given, I would tend to view them as having been disconfirmed. Either that, or they date to an age that's in the far future that we can't really imagine at this point.
All right, Samantha, thanks for starting us off. Appreciate it. This one comes from Gene. Until the second coming, we won't have our bodies if we are in heaven, provided we get there, of course. How will we interact then with our loved ones who we hope are in heaven and we long to see again? What does that even look like? I believe the church does not have definitive teaching on this, but what has been the speculation?
Well, you're right. The church doesn't have a definitive teaching on this, but there is, I think, some pretty reliable speculation in this area. Since we won't have our bodies with us, but we do have evidence that we will be communicating. Like, for example, we'll learn if we're in heaven about people on earth who want our prayers, and then we'll be able to pray to God on their behalf. That's the intercession of the saints. That communication would have to take place mind to mind, which would mean it's telepathic communication. Now, there are different ideas about how that telepathic communication might take place. For example, one view that was supported, for example, by St. Thomas Aquinas is that essentially between humans, that telepathy would all happen through God. So God is like a heavenly internet router that will take messages from earth, route them to the saints in heaven, and then the saints in heaven will pray to him and he'll have an effect on earth. And so God is mediating all of these messages, all of this comm traffic. On the other hand, we have some evidence from parapsychology of human to human telepathy here on earth. And if that's true, then God might be superintending the process the way he superintends everything in creation, but we might be directly telepathically messaging each other. And so God might not be serving as a heavenly internet router. In terms of how the afterlife is depicted, well, the book of Revelation depicts the new earth post resurrection as an environment where the saints live, and it's depicted as a glorious city with streets of gold. That's where that you sometimes hear that image associated with heaven, although what a lot of people forget is Revelation actually says the streets are transparent gold. Also, Revelation depicts the gates of this city. It says there are 12 gates, and they're made out of giant pearls with like a gate carved into it, the giant pearl. And so that's where the pearly gates come from.
Oh, yeah.
So you can imagine these big spherical pearls with gates carved into them, city-sized gates. It's pretty well concluded by biblical scholars that these images are not meant to be taken literally, because the afterlife will actually exceed what we can imagine now. And so these are meant to give us a taste of what it's like, but they're not meant to be exactly what we're going to see. And this is also suggested by evidence from parapsychology. There are several death-related phenomena that the field studies, because it does study the survival of human consciousness after death. Some of these include what are known as deathbed visions. where someone is not yet dead, but they're like laying on their deathbed and they have a vision of, for example, angels or departed loved ones coming to them and saying it's your time and we've come to get you and bring you to the next life. They also sometimes get glimpses of the next life. Same thing happens in what are known as near-death experiences, where someone either biologically dies or almost biologically dies, but sometimes they do, their heart will stop, and they perceive the same kind of stuff. They have angels or relatives coming to bring them to the next life. They get imagery from the next life, and then there are what are known as after-death communications, where someone has lost a loved one, and then spontaneously their loved one shows up one day, either in a dream or in waking life, and they say, hey, I wanted to let you know I'm okay here in the afterlife. Or sometimes they say, I need you to forgive me because I'm sorry for that stuff I did to you during life. And sometimes they get to see a glimpse of the afterlife where their departed loved one is. And in all of these experiences, in deathbed visions, in near-death experiences, and in after-death communications, when someone gets to see the afterlife, it's very beautiful, at least for 80% of people. This is not counting the people who have unpleasant experiences. But of the people who have pleasant experiences, they see a beautiful realm. It may be garden-like. It may be city-like. It may combine elements of like a garden, kind of country, beautiful landscape with beautiful flowers and things like that, with little outposts of cities in it too. And so it's generally understood that, just like with the Book of Revelation, that these images are meant to give us a sense of what it's like, but we shouldn't take them overly literally.
Gene, what a great question. That brings us right to the break. It's an internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin this hour. Lots more questions to come right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on. Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Bible in a Year with me, Father Mike Schmitz, is now available right here on Catholic Radio. Encounter God's voice and learn how to live life through the lens of Scripture with a new episode every day. I hope you'll join me as we discover how the story of salvation unfolds and how we fit into that story today.
Bible in a Year and Catechism in a Year with Father Mike Schmitz, tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Pacific on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest, and Jimmy gets a lot of questions from a lot of different sources, and sometimes we gather them up and we do an internet show. And all these questions come from the internet. We're calling it Internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin today, and this one comes from Linda. Do you think there were Sasquatches on the Ark? Oh, I lost Jimmy's audio, so I'm not. Did somebody mute Jimmy? Look, we're about to find out, Linda, but there's a conspiracy against speaking openly about Sasquatches, apparently. I don't have audio from Jimmy. So we're not exactly sure why we lost audio. All right, I'll tell you what. I'll do the ad while we're waiting to see if they can figure out what's going on with the audio. Check out all the great deals over at shop.catholic.com. For a long time, shop.catholic.com has been our bookstore where you could buy Catholic Answers books and materials, but it has expanded. You can buy everything from books and materials as we used to do to clothing, hats, sweatshirts, all that stuff. Check it out at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy, do you think there were Sasquatches on the Ark? Oh, well, we still got an audio. They're checking the cables. They're literally checking the cables in there. We are not sure why we lost audio, but it's coming. They'll work it out. They'll figure it out in a second. I almost gave out the number, but I can't give out the number because it's an internet Ask Me Anything today. We used to call these open forum. Now we call them Ask Me Anything because that's what the world decided to do. The world decided to have these Ask Me Anything episodes on Reddit and around the internet. And since that's what young people, that's the moniker young people understand these things by, we decided, yeah, let's do that. Let's just call it Ask Me Anything because there's a wider audience that knows what that is than knows what open forum is. So if you used to love listening to open forum, it's the same thing. It's just called Ask Me Anything, Catholic edition, or Ask Me Anything, whatever our particular topic that we want to cover with that person that day is. Usually I give out the number at this point, but I am not going to give out the number because all of our questions are coming from the internet today. It's an internet Ask Me Anything. Jimmy Akin is our guest. And I'll tell you what I'll do. One other thing I'll do while we're waiting to see if they can get that microphone straightened out with Jimmy is I will invite you to come to the Catholic Answers Conference. We do it each September, the last weekend of September right here in sunny San Diego. About 1,000 people come over the course of the weekend, and we have a great time. It's got a little bit of a summer camp, apologetic summer camp feel to it, but it's a very nice summer camp because we do it at the Hyatt right here in La Jolla. So you can check out that at CatholicAnswersConference.com. Just check out CatholicAnswersConference.com and you can come. And you can check out all that we do at Catholic.com. Of course, if there's materials that, anything that you'd like, virtually any question you'd like answered about the Catholic faith is answered over at Catholic.com. It's the second most popular Catholic website, the second most popular Catholic URL in the world. The first belongs to the Pope. So, I mean, that's tough competition. We'll take second place to the Pope anytime. We'll take second place if first place is occupied by the Pope. But what we hear all the time from people, from pastors, from RCIA directors, from people who work in apologetics or
1, 2,
schools,
3,
that, Jimmy counted. Well, that means I can hear him. All right, I'll just go back to the questions. Check out Catholic.com for all your Catholic questions. Jimmy, do you think there were Sasquatches on the Ark?
Well, if you assume that Sasquatches are real, and if you assume that the Great Flood was a global flood, so that the only creatures that survived were on the Ark, then yeah, I would say Sasquatches were absolutely on the Ark. But that's making those two assumptions. So, there are other alternatives besides Sasquatches exist, and besides the Great Flood was a global flood. If you want to hear about those, you can actually listen to a few episodes of Mysterious World. I did a 2-part look at the Great Flood in episodes 175 and 176. So you can go to mysterious.fm/175 and mysterious.fm/176 to hear about the Great Flood and what science and reason what faith and reason would say about it. I also did Bigfoot way back at the beginning of the show in episode 3, which is at mysterious.fm/3. But I would say that I have been reconsidering my views on the subject. At the time, I said that it's very unlikely that a large primate exists in North America without having been discovered by modern science because of all the eyeballs and cameras and people looking for it. However, I've since doing that episode 5 years ago, I've come across additional evidence that is making me reconsider that. I'm not at a point of saying I'm not at a point of saying I think Bigfoot or Sasquatch is real, but there's more evidence than I was aware of at the time, and so I'm not as confident of that view.
Oh, so we might get a revisiting of the whole Sasquatch question.
Yes.
Oh, very good.
That's the plan.
Well, Linda, we made you wait for your answer, but thank you very much for the question. It's an internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin. Eric wanted to know this, Jimmy. We say the Trinity is 3 persons. I've been told on inquiry that these are not three selves as we would normally understand persons. But I'm also told that the Holy Spirit is the love between the Father and the Son, and that the Holy Trinity is a community, but only distinct selves can love each other or be in community. Both of these, it seems to me, cannot be true. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, and I think part of the issue here is Eric is encountering people using terminology that does not have a precise theological definition. There is a precise theological definition for person. This term, the classic definition, was given by the philosopher Boethius, who lived back in the, say, 500s, and he defined a person as an independent substance with a rational nature. But self does not have a precise theological definition. I would be very hesitant to use language that suggests the three persons of the Trinity are not selves as we would normally understand the term. The three persons of the Trinity obviously transcend the kind of person that we are. They transcend us. In fact, they are the prototype for all finite persons. God is three persons from eternity. These are infinite persons that share a divine nature, and we're kind of cheap knockoffs. So God is the prototype of persons compared to us. And I would tend to say, since selfhood is associated with personhood, I would tend to say that the three persons are also the prototype selves. I would say, if you simply say that the persons are not, that they're not persons or selves, the way we understand the term, then it would communicate a false idea to the listener that would somehow suggest that they're less than persons. It would depersonalize them to say, well, they're not persons or they're not selves the way we think of persons or selves. People would tend to make the mistake of thinking they're less than a person instead of, oh, they're the original prototype persons or selves. So I think that careful work would have to be done to avoid a conclusion like that. In the case of the Holy Spirit being the love of the Father and the Son, this is analogous. That is church teaching, and it's analogous to how the Son is the Word of the Father. Love here in our realm, which is less than the divine realm, love is not a person. It's something abstract. And in the same way, words are not persons. They're something more abstract. But on the divine level, the reality of personhood is so great that the Word of the Father is another person. So the Word on the divine level is a person. And in the same way, the reality of personhood on the divine level is so great that the love between the Father and the Son is also a person. And so the three persons of the Trinity are not less than persons. They're not impersonal. They're more than we are. And that's why the Word and the love on the divine level are actually distinct persons in addition to the Father.
Eric, thank you very much. The great mystery of our faith. Appreciate the question. It's an internet. We've got internet questions for Jimmy today, an internet Ask Me Anything. This one comes from Ryan. Is there any equivalent to Eucharistic adoration for the precious blood? If so, why? If not, why not?
So the law requires that the precious blood be reserved only when it is going to be taken to someone who is sick. This presumably would be a sick person who can't receive communion in the form of the host. That's why they need to receive the precious blood. When the precious blood is reserved, it must be placed in a sealed container in the tabernacle to prevent it from being accidentally spilled. Consequently, there is no equivalent to Eucharistic exposition for the precious blood, at least not in the Latin Rite. However, exposition, which is where you put it out for people to view and adore, exposition is not the only kind of Eucharistic adoration. And consequently, if the precious blood has been reserved so that it can be taken to a sick person, one could still adore the precious blood even though it's in the tabernacle. It's not exposed, but reposed in the tabernacle. And even if it hasn't been adored, one can still adore the precious blood in the host, because Christ's body and blood are united. So his blood is in the host as well as his body. And whether the host is reserved or exposed, you could adore the precious blood within it.
All right. That's going to bring us just about to the break. So Ryan will say thank you very much for the question. Lots more questions to come. Perhaps some Sasquatches, UFOs, aliens, demons, all the things that you find on, or some of the things that you find on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World will be among those. I do know that there's lots of great questions to come, so hang on. We'll be right back with more Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live. When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
Our Lord needs articulate defenders of the truth to spread the joy of the Catholic faith. Catholic Answers Monthly Giving Club, Society 315, helps you fulfill the call in 1 Peter 3:15 to always be prepared to make a defense for the hope that is in you. For as little as $10 a month, you'll help Catholics grow in faith, bring lapsed Catholics home, and lead non-Catholics to the truth. Go to casociety315.com and join today.
As we read the Gospels, every Christian faces the question again and again, what does Jesus mean? Getting the answer right is critical to both growth in holiness and fruitful evangelization. Want to know Jesus better so you can introduce him to your friends? Then it's time to get serious about understanding his words. Why not join Catholic Answers for our 10th annual Apologetics Conference? Learn from me the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. September 26th through 29th, right here in sunny San Diego. Learn from our guests, Dr. Scott Hahn and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, Father Sebastian Walsh, Billy Junker, Father Paul Check, and, of course, all of your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. It'll be 4 days of fun, faith, fellowship, and a live radio show. Seats are still available, but going fast to visit CatholicAnswersConference.com or call 1-888-291-8000 today. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. We are only a fraction of the way through all these awesome questions that we've got, so lots more fun to have. Jimmy Akin is our guest, of course, the proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World that you can find more than 300 episodes of at mysterious.fm and new episodes each Friday morning. And if you've got a question for Jimmy, you can also call us. Many days Jimmy's here with us, but sometimes people send the questions via the internet, and so it's an internet Ask Me Anything today. David asks this: what's the difference between feasting and gluttony?
Okay, feasting occurs when one eats more than normal in order to celebrate something special. Gluttony occurs when one eats a sufficient quantity of food, either in one sit-in or over a period of time, to endanger one's health. So there can be overlap between feasting and gluttony, but they are not the same thing. Sometimes one can feast without committing gluttony. Sometimes one can commit gluttony and feasting at the same time. Sometimes one can commit gluttony without feasting. The difference is that feasting involves more food than normal, and gluttony involves enough food to damage your health.
Oh.
So that's the distinction. I happen to watch there's a YouTube channel I follow called Beard Meets Food. It's about this guy from England who is a competitive eater, and he goes around to different restaurants and tries their food challenges. You know, because different restaurants will have, like, if you can eat this 3-foot wide pizza by yourself in an hour, it's free and we'll give you a T-shirt. So
Yeah.
restaurants will have different food challenges. And so every week, Beard Meats Food goes to different restaurants around the world and takes on their food challenges. And he normally succeeds, and he normally eats a very considerable amount of food. I watched him eat recently. His most recent one at the time of recording was I think it was a lobster roll, which is a kind of lobster meat sandwich.
Yeah.
And French fries that together weighed 8 pounds. So the lobster roll itself weighed 6 pounds. And then he had 1.5 pounds of fries and 1 pound of coleslaw. And so he ate 8 pounds of food in one sitting, which is amazing. But he is not committing gluttony because he fasts in between when he takes on the food challenges. So he's actually a pretty thin guy. So he's not eating enough to damage his health. That's what makes it gluttony. If you eat enough to damage your health, that's essentially what gluttony is.
Oh, well, thank you for the question. Beard Meats Food.
At least in a modern context. Historically, if you ate so much you could commit gluttony in other ways too. Like, let's suppose your family has a limited food budget and you just pig out and eat food that takes food out of the mouths of your wife and children. Well, then that would be gluttony too. Gluttony is eating enough food that it causes harm either to yourself or to others.
David, thank you for the question. This one comes from Stephanie. Someone with the surname of Murray said the name meant they are descended from Mary after she moved to France. I don't know. So pardon my French, but WTH question mark. What is it?
Yes. So the claim is that the surname Murray comes from Mary, and that Mary, the Virgin Mary, at some point moved to France, and that's what led to the name. Okay, well, this is a folk etymology, as they're known in linguistics, which is just an idea that people have come up with. It's not rigorously documented. And like a lot of folk etymologies, it's really problematic. In the first place, Murray is not a French name. Murray is a Scottish and Irish name, and we know where it comes from. This is where a lot of folk etymologies stumble, is linguists, and specifically etymologists, can go into the historical record and see how the name developed. And in the Scottish version of the name, it developed from Moray. Moray being derived from Gaelic roots that mean sea settlement. So if you came from the sea settlement, you came from the Moray, and your last name became Murray. Some versions of the Irish version reportedly mean things like descendant of the servant of Mary, which would be a title of religious devotion. One of your ancestors considered themselves a servant of Mary, and so you get the name Murray that way. But we have no good evidence of Mary coming to France.
All right. When I was reading it, I was thinking maybe Mary Magdalene is, because that's the one that sometimes you hear the legend of. Mary Magdalene came to France,
well,
but anyway.
Same thing applies to Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
No good evidence of that happening.
Stephanie, thank you very much for the question. Trey asks this: make or dismiss the case that after the resurrection, Jesus appeared to Mother Mary first and in private.
So the only reliable accounts that we have of who Jesus appeared to after the resurrection are found in the 4 Gospels and the book of Acts and 1 Corinthians 15. None of these sources mention Jesus appearing first to his mother. Therefore, we have no good evidence that such an event happened. It's possible that it did, and I can understand how pious sentiment might lead someone to propose that it did, but we don't have good evidence that it did.
All right. Thank you very much, Trey. Let's go to Robert's question. What's a good book that talks about how the apostles died rather than denying the resurrection? Oh, I see.
Well,
he wants to know that they were martyred. Like, what's the evidence that they were martyrs, essentially?
Yeah, so this is a subject that comes up in a lot of apologetics books about the resurrection,
Yeah.
and there have been a number of good ones recently. There is, however, a book that is specifically on the question of what happened to the apostles that is of a scholarly nature. And so this is the book that I'd recommend if you really want to dig into the subject. It's called The Fate of the Apostles, and it's by Sean McDowell. And it's the best treatment of what happened to them as far as the historical record is concerned. You should know going in, though. Now, sometimes apologists get a little excited and overclaim a little bit, and they'll say, like, all of the apostles died martyrs' deaths except for John. And there are two problems with that. First, there are traditions that John also died a martyr's death. And second, we really don't know what happened to quite a number of the 12. We know what happened to some of them in considerable detail, like we know about what happened to Peter and Paul. But others, we're not so sure. We have an idea of where they went, like Thomas evangelized in India and so forth. We have pretty good evidence for that. But we don't have detailed, accurate records of their deaths. And so one of the things you find out when you read The Fate of the Apostles is, we got to be a little bit moderate in what we claim about this. What we can claim is with high confidence is that they definitely suffered in life rather than deny the resurrection. We see that happening just in the book of Acts, and in 2 Corinthians, Paul has a list of all these things that he suffered on account of his ministry. He gets stoned and he gets beaten with rods and he gets shipwrecked, and he says, this happened to me this many times and this happened to me this many times. And all that's by AD, 53 when 2 Corinthians was written. And Acts similarly records persecutions of the apostles for preaching the word. So we can say with very high confidence that they suffered on account of their message of the resurrection. And some of them did die because of their preaching the resurrection. But we can't say that all of them or all of them but John did.
All right. Thanks very much for the question, Trey. Jimmy, I just had my own question as you were talking. Have you ever published like in a chart form when the books of the New Testament were written? I know you've written about it, but I've never seen like like a little chart that could say this one was this year, this one was this year.
I think I have that or something like that in The Bible is a Catholic Book.
Oh, okay. All right. I got that
and
right here.
I've also written blog posts about the dating of various books, and I have unpublished writings that I hope to complete and publish one day. As you know, I'm a biblical chronology nerd, and so I study biblical chronology in detail, and I've written a sizable chunk of a book on biblical chronology that would push it into new areas that I haven't seen anybody else do yet.
Like figuring
out the approximate dates of when things in the book of Acts happened, because Luke gives us bunches of chronological clues, and then how to fit those with Paul's epistles. And so I've got a lot of really interesting stuff that I just haven't completed and published yet, but hopefully one day.
Oh, very good. Very good. All right. We got to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Catholic Answers Live with Jimmy Akin is coming right back.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more.
This is Jim Pinto, Director of EWTN Media Missionaries. EWTN's mission is to spread the eternal word and to teach others that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life. You can help EWTN share the good news by becoming a media missionary. Visit EWTNmissionaries.com today and join us in sharing the eternal word with the world.
Welcome back. Catholic Answers Live. Lots of questions from the internet for Jimmy Akin this hour. It's an internet Ask Me Anything. Jimmy Karen wants to know this. Okay, Jimmy, I have a weird one for you.
Well, we'll see how weird it is.
That's the way I always feel. Whenever anyone says, Jimmy, I have a weird question for you, I think, have you listened to Jimmy Akin? Like, this better be weird because he gets some really weird stuff. All right. I just hope I get a chance to hear your answer. What's all this about red heifers being prepared for slaughter in Israel as fulfillment of a prophecy?
Okay, so this is something that comes up in the news periodically because of an organization in Israel known as the Temple Institute, which is based in Jerusalem. The Temple Institute is a Jewish organization that is wanting to actively prepare for a restoration of the Jewish temple with a restoration of animal sacrifices. And this is a controversial position in Judaism. There is, in many branches of Judaism, a belief that there will be a future third temple. But there are some controversies about it. According to some Jews, there will be a future third temple in Jerusalem, but only God gets to build it. It's not going to be built by human hands. Or, according to others, it can only be rebuilt by the Messiah. So you've got to wait until the Messiah shows up before before the temple will be rebuilt. And then others would say, nah, you don't got to wait for God or the Messiah. You can just go ahead and do it. But there's a problem with that because the Jewish Temple Mount is where the Dome of the Rock is. And the Dome of the Rock is a big, important shrine in Islam, and it would cause a massive, massive war if you tried to, that could threaten the existence of Israel, if you tried to rebuild the temple on the Temple Mount where the Dome of the Rock is. Now, there have been some proposals of, well, maybe we could build it slightly adjacent and it wouldn't involve interfering with the Dome of the Rock, but that's not going to, there are other people who are going to say, no, we got to build it right where the Dome of the Rock is. Also, in addition to the problems with rebuilding it, there's also a current in a lot of Judaism that says, we don't really want animal sacrifices back. Having a temple where we can worship God, that's one thing. That would be a good thing. But we don't really want to be, slaughtering bulls and goats and sheep and pigeons and stuff like that and sprinkling their blood and taking their entrails and doing stuff. So not all Jews are sold on the idea of restoring animal sacrifices. But the Temple Institute is. And so they've been doing various things like preparing the special garments that Jewish priests are supposed to wear and preparing other liturgical articles that would be used in the temple, like a menorah and things like that. And one of the rituals that's described in the Old Testament does involve what's known as a red heifer, although in Hebrew it says the red cow. This ritual is found in Numbers 19, and basically you take a blemishless, so it's got no faults, you take a blemishless red heifer, a heifer being a young female cow that has not given birth or been worked according to Numbers 19. So you take this young heifer and you sacrifice it, and then you burn it, and you take its ashes and you mix them with water, and then you can use and some other stuff, and then you can use this water as a rite of purification, particularly for the impurity, the ritual impurity that an Israelite would incur from coming into contact with a corpse. So like you let's say you're a hospital worker, somebody dies, you've got to handle the body, and you're now ritually impure. Well, you could go and use this water to purify yourself. Okay, so in evangelicalism, in Christianity, there is big belief in many evangelical circles that there will be a third temple, and that the rebuilding of the third temple will be associated with the end times, with the second coming of Christ, things like that. And so evangelicals have been very interested in the Temple Institute and what it's trying to do. And And so periodically, the Temple Institute has been looking for red heifers that could potentially be used. And they found a number of candidates over the course of time. Some of them have been dismissed once the rabbis got a chance to look at them and said, it's actually not what we're looking for. It's got, it's got this minor ding here. It's got a little blemish.
Uh-huh.
But they continue to look for them. And because of interest in all of this in evangelical circles, it pops up in the Christian news sometimes.
Oh, all right. Karen, thank you very much. I don't know how weird it was, but it sure was interesting. Appreciate the question. This one comes from...
I read a book recently a few months ago by a British researcher called High Strangeness.
Yeah.
And his name is Jack Hunter. He's actually a parapsychologist, and he works a lot in a field known as paranthropology, which is the application of parapsychology to anthropology. And his book is called High Weirdness or High Strangeness. I forget which one. And I read it and I thought, it's not that weird. I've seen a lot weirder.
It's pretty hard to out-weird Jimmy Akin. I like the idea of just walking around the heifer like you're walking around a rental car looking for dings or bumps or something like that. Karen, thank you for the question. This one comes from Jenna. Please give your feedback on this statement. Receiving on the tongue is the default option.
Well, that used to be the case in the Latin Rite. For a long time in the Latin Rite, the laity only received communion on the tongue. And so that was the default. Then, following the Second Vatican Council, an indult, meaning a permission, was given to also receive in the hand. And under that scheme, it would still be that the default is you receive on the tongue, but you're also permitted to receive on the hand. But now we're in a third stage where, according to the general instruction of the Roman Missal, this is Germ 160, if you want to look it up, the consecrated host may be received either on the tongue or in the hand at the discretion of each communicant. So the way the law is currently phrased, it doesn't establish a preference for either one. We're no longer in the period where there was an indult to receive in the hand. Instead, the law has now put them on the same level. Now, I personally always receive on the tongue, but that's a matter of my own personal piety. In terms of what the law says, the law puts them on an equal footing in the Latin Rite, and it leaves which option you want to exercise up to the individual communicant's discretion.
Thank you, Jenna. Hey, David, thank you for this. I'm looking forward to finding out what the answer is. What really is sleep? David asks.
Well, sleep is a biological state that, with variations, appears to characterize all life forms. So it's not just humans, it's not just mammals like dogs and cats, it's not just birds or reptiles. Fish seem to sleep. Insects seem to sleep. Even microbes, subatomic creatures, go through these periods of less activity than where they're in a kind of what's known as torpor. That is apparently their version of sleep. So sleep appears to characterize all known life forms. It involves lower levels of physical and mental activity, at least for those creatures that have what you could think of as a mind. So our bodies become less mobile. Our minds become less active. And in mammals, birds, and reptiles, we have evidence for dreaming. And that would suggest that either dreaming is really useful because that it evolved multiple times in different branches of the tree of life, or more likely it evolved once about 360 million years ago, when the last common ancestor between those branches would have existed. And it's been so useful that evolution has kept it around. There's some kind of selection pressure on the genes that cause dreaming. The purpose of sleep is not fully understood at this point. However, it appears to involve resetting biological processes, like getting rid of fatigue toxins and stuff like that, so you wake up fresh. It also may involve the repair of the body. Your body may be able to fix itself in this low activity state in a way it can't if you're up and moving around. It also may involve the regulation of the immune system so that it helps protect us against diseases. And dreaming, for those creatures that have it, may possibly involve the consolidation and clearing of memory. So all of those are possibilities, but if you want to know more, I did an episode of Mysterious World on the mystery of sleep, and it's episode 98. So that would be mysterious.fm/98.
David, thank you for that interesting question. This one comes from Kevin. What does the church state about forcing men to take psychological exams before being accepted to seminary?
Well, canon law provides that before ordination, the bishop must have moral certainty that the candidate for ordination has the right psychological qualities for ministry. But it does not mandate, so this is the Code of Canon Law itself, does not mandate that psychological exams be taken prior to seminary. So since the Code of Canon Law doesn't say it, it's not part of universal law, at least in the code. So any regulations pertaining to this are going to be either in particular law or in some kind of, meaning the law of a particular territory, or they're going to be in something other than the code. Now, I would say it's not unreasonable to do some kind of psychological testing before you admit someone to seminary, because if the person is not going to be suitable, I mean, seminary takes, years. And if someone's not going to be suitable in the end, then it's going to waste your time and your money and a lot of frustration on the part not just of the church officials, but also on the part of the person who's going to seminary. So if it could be determined ahead of time whether or not a candidate is a good fit psychologically for the ministry, then it would make sense to do it before you admit them to seminary. And since the sex abuse crisis broke out, there has been a greater emphasis on pre-seminary screening of candidates. So you don't have guys who are not suitable, who get all the way through the program, and then it's hard to say, no, sorry, last minute you don't get ordained after you invested 5 years preparing for this. So it does make some sense to have some pre-seminary screening incorporating psychological testing. Key documents to read in this include a Vatican document that is called Guidelines for the Use of Psychology in the Admission and Formation of Candidates for the Priesthood. So that's Guidelines for the Use of Psychology in the Administration and Formation of Candidates to the Priesthood. There's also a United States Catholic Conference of Catholic Bishops document called Guidelines for the Use of Psychology in Seminary Admissions. And then there's also a USCCB document called Program for Priestly Formation, which is currently in its 6th edition. And so those are 3 documents I'd point Kevin towards if he wants to read more about this and the details of what the regulations here in the United States are in this regard. I would also say, though, that there's a big caveat here, because psychology is not one of the physical sciences, and like all science, it continuously develops, and it's often termed, these days the polite way to say it is it's a social science, but historically the way it's been said is it is a soft science, meaning it depends a lot on interpretation, and a lot of psychological tests aren't really very good. For example, the MMPI, or Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, it doesn't really tell you very much. And so there can be a tendency to attribute too much significance to the psychological tests we have available to us now.
Kevin, thank you for the question. Lots more questions to come. Jimmy Akin is our guest. It's an internet Ask Me Anything. We've gathered up lots of questions that have come via the internet to Jimmy, and we got them all lined up and ready to go. Some of them weird, some of them just interesting. We'll get to all of that right after this on Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guest, and we continue with an internet Ask Me Anything. All the questions have come to us via the internet. Jimmy Akin, of course, senior apologist here at Catholic Answers, the author of A Daily Defense, 365 Days Plus One to Becoming a Better Apologist, and many other things. The proprietor of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. Thanks for being back for another hour, Jimmy.
Yeah, my pleasure. By the way, during the break, I looked up the title of that book that I mentioned last hour by the paranthropologist Jack Hunter, and it's called Deep Weird, The Varieties of High Strangeness Experience, and it's an anthology, so he's got different authors writing in it. But my experience when I read it was, yes, I've heard weirder. This isn't particularly deeply weird to me.
Deep Weird. It's a good title though. As a matter of fact, that could be a nickname. I got to think of who I can apply that nickname to. Not you, Darren. You're not Deep Weird. You're not. No. All right, back to the internet we go for our questions. We got a bunch of them for Jimmy. This one comes from Brady.
Darren might be pleasantly weird.
Yes. Yeah. Look at that, yeah. Darren's, he seems so satisfied with that as his nickname. He seems genuinely happy that that's his nickname. Brady asked this, what is the history of the use of the Tetragrammaton / divine name in worship, particularly as it relates to Jehovah's Witnesses?
Okay, so the Tetragrammaton, that literally means, based on its etymology, the 4 letters, and it's a reference to the 4 Hebrew consonants that are used to spell God's name in the Old Testament. The English equivalents, in Hebrew, it's Yud, He, Vav, He, or Yud, He, Waw, He, depending on the pronunciation scheme you're using. The English equivalents are YHWH. And it's believed by scholars that those were most probably pronounced Yahweh early in Israelite history. However, after the Babylonian exile, Jews started pronouncing it less and less frequency. And so by about the 200s BC, they really weren't using the name, and they weren't saying it out the way they had previously. And in worship, there were some situations, like I remember hearing that, like, there's one day of the year, it may have been the Day of Atonement, when the priest would still pronounce it, but it was basically gone from regular discourse. So if you had, now that created an issue, because they read the Torah every Sabbath in the synagogue, and the divine name's right there in the text. So they would come up with substitute terms, and the main substitute term was Adonai, which means my Lord. And so they would, whenever they'd be reading along, and whenever they'd hit the Tetragrammaton, they'd just say Adonai instead. Well, so that was the situation at the time of the writing of the New Testament, in the Second Temple period, which is why in the New Testament, we don't find the Tetragrammaton or a spelled out version of God's name in Greek letters. Instead, what they do is they use, and they even use this word when they are quoting from the Old Testament. In the New Testament, it'll say, as the prophet so-and-so said this. And if the divine name appears in the quotation, they replace it with the Greek equivalent of Adonai, which is Kurios. Kurios means Lord in Greek. So it's basically the same. It's not my Lord the way it is in Hebrew, but it's basically the same concept, Lord. And so then history rolls along, the New Testament gets written, and by the Middle Ages, a system of vowel points was created for the Hebrew language. Now, Hebrew, going back to 1000 BC, had consonants, but they didn't have vowels. And so what they did when they came up with vowels is they made them, for the most part, little small points or marks that they would put above, below, or in the middle of letters, of consonants. And so these are known as the vowel points. They're just little marks that tell you what vowel you should say after this consonant. And so by the 1100s, the scholars who came up with the primary system of vowel pointing, they're known as the Masoretes, they added the vowel points of Adonai to the biblical text where it says the divine name. So you've got the consonants of Yahweh with the vowel points of Adonai. And the vowel points were there to remind you, don't say the divine name, say Adonai instead, if you're a lector reading this out in the synagogue. But what happened was by the 1500s, people would read the consonants of Yahweh and the vowel points of Adonai as if it was a single real word. And that gave us Yahovah or Jehovah. And so by the 1500s, Jehovah came into existence as a name that people would use for God. And in the 1900s, the Jehovah's Witnesses mandated the use of Jehovah as the name for God in their religious group. So you're supposed to say Jehovah, and they think that this is necessary because we're supposed to magnify God's name, and to them that means literally using a version of his name. However, I would say, I understand why you're wanting to do that, but it's actually not required, because the New Testament authors didn't do this. The New Testament was written in the period when Jews, including the first Jewish Christians, were not saying Yahweh or Jehovah or any version of the divine name. They were saying Adonai, and that's why in the Greek New Testament, it never uses the divine name. It uses kurios, which means Lord. So Jesus and the apostles weren't going around talking about Yahweh or Jehovah all the time. They were talking about the Lord. And so consequently, I think the Jehovah's Witnesses' attitude on this is misplaced because it was not shared by Jesus and the authors of the New Testament.
All righty. Thank you very much for the question, Brady. Jerry asks this. I heard your show where you mentioned a study in India on near-death experiences where the people in India would see some spirits that were either good or evil spirits. Christians see angels, good or bad. So non-believers could argue that the fact that people don't see the same thing is proof that these visions are due only to chemical reactions of a dying brain. How would you respond?
Well, okay, so first of all, people coming from a Christian context do sometimes see demons when they have near-death experiences. There are what are known as distressing near-death experiences. They account for something like a fifth or 20% of near-death experiences. And in distressing ones, people do report seeing demons. So they both report seeing good angels and bad angels in their experiences. When we look at the Indian experiences, and the name of this book, by the way, is At the Hour of Death. I want to say it's by Erlander Haraldson, and I'm blanking on the other author's name. But in any event, they did this study, and in India, people would see, I mentioned how in the previous hour, how in deathbed visions and near-death experiences, people will see these spirits either of departed loved ones or angels or something like angels coming to escort them into the afterlife. Well, in India, the spirits they refer to as doing this are called Yamduts. Yama is the personification of death, and so the messengers that Yama sends are called Yamduts. And the Yamduts themselves are angels. They're called messengers of death, and messenger is what the word angel means. So these are angels of death, and they're not perceived as being bad. Some of them are frightening. If you've lived a bad life, your Yamduts may be frightening to you. If you've lived a good life, your Yamduts may be beautiful and pleasant. But that's no different than angels, because angels in the Bible can be pleasant or they can be scary. God used the angel of death to take care of the Egyptian firstborn. I mean, that's scary, and he had an angel smiting Israel with the plague in the time of King David. So just because something's scary or dangerous doesn't mean it's not good. So I would say that the people in India are seeing the same thing in their experiences of deathbed visions and near-death experiences. They're just interpreting them differently. They have different names and images in their culture, and that influences how they perceive these entities. But that doesn't tell us anything one way or another about, is a dying brain producing this experience? People both in America and in India report seeing spirits that are not human that perform the same function, escorting people into the afterlife. And, in normal life, we can perceive things that we see around us as, in terms of our cultural background and the names we have for things. And we regard that, if we're seeing the same thing, doing the same function, we just call it by different names based on our culture, then we would say, well, the experience is fundamentally accurate. If I see a tree and someone from another culture sees the same tree, even if we call it different things and we notice different things about it because of our culture and our previous history, if we're both seeing the tree, then that's evidence that our experience is objectively real. And so if both Christians and Hindus are seeing these non-human spirits showing up to escort you to the afterlife, they're fundamentally seeing the same thing. And that would suggest this is an objectively real experience of the world and not simply something that's conjured up by a dying brain any more than the tree we both see is conjured up by a living brain.
Jerry, thanks for the question. That takes us right to the break. Right back with more Internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Stay with us for more Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at magnificat.com.
Catholic Influencers is a great podcast from Australia. It studies the weekly readings and breaks them down into layman's terms, showing you how they're relevant to our life today, making theology accessible for everyone. You can hear Catholic Influencers as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates around the world, all in one place. All free at EWTN Podcast Central. Visit EWTN.com/radio and click Podcast Central today.
Catholic Answers Live. It's an Internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin this hour. Lots of internet questions for Jimmy. Jimmy, you wanted to say something about a book that you mentioned before?
Yeah. So in case anybody wants to look it up, that book I mentioned is called At the Hour of Death. And the co-authors, I mentioned one of them, Erlander Haraldsson. The other is Carlos Osis. And so if you want to look it up and read about the study that was done in these two nations, it's At the Hour of Death by Erlander Haraldsson and Carlos Osis.
All righty. This one comes from Ryan. What would be the best way for us Catholics to answer some Protestants who claim what's happening in Israel right now has to do with the second coming of Jesus, and that in their minds is going to happen soon or at any moment?
Well, I wouldn't dismiss the reformation of Israel after 1,800 years as having no prophetic significance. I mean, when the Jewish people suddenly gets its land back after all that time, okay, that suggests to me a notable event in the history of Israel as God's people. And so I would say that that's a sign that we're closer to the end than we were before. However, that still doesn't tell us we're close to the end. And in particular, I'm skeptical of claims about it's going to happen any time now. Ever since Israel reformed in 1948, there has been a history of bad prophetic interpretations in this area. For example, a lot of people prior to 1988 would say, oh, well, a biblical generation is 40 years long, and Jesus said that. Now, he was really talking about the destruction of the temple, but a lot of people in the evangelical world took him as referring to the end of the world. He said this is going to happen within this generation, and so what he meant is the temple's going to be destroyed within a generation of when he said that in AD 33, and it was destroyed in AD 70. But a lot of people have misread that as him talking about the end of the world, and so they said, oh, so within a generation of Israel reforming, the world's going to end. And a generation, biblically, they would say is 40 years. Well, in some passages, but not in others. And so they would say, therefore, since Israel is now reformed, we've got less than 40 years till the second coming. So the second coming is going to happen by 1988. And people like in the evangelical world, like Hal Lindsey, would write books like The Late Great Planet Earth and Satan is Alive and Well on Planet Earth and things like that. And they were predicting that Armageddon would happen by the 1980s, that there'd be this big war in the Middle East and Russia would get involved and all this stuff in the Middle East in the 1980s. And none of that happened. So there's a history of failed predictions regarding Israel. And there are also problems with the overall prophetic system. A lot of these predictions were based on a prophetic interpretation known as dispensational premillennialism, which unfortunately is a false system. And so a lot of these predictions came out of this false prophetic system that now is being rethought in a bunch of areas in evangelicalism. The only sure sign that we have from Scripture for when the second coming is going to be near does involve the Jewish people, but it's not the reformation of Israel. I think the reformation of Israel is notable, but it's not the sign that that the second coming is going to happen. That sign is referred to in Romans chapter 11, and St. Paul indicates that there's going to be some kind of large-scale conversion of the Jewish people to Christ, and he says that is going to signal life from the dead. That's the real thing that tells us the resurrection is about to happen. So until that happens, until we see a large-scale conversion of the Jewish population to Christianity, I would say the second coming is still in our future.
All right, Ryan. I hope that one was helpful to you. Let's go to John David's question. What allegedly evidential near-death experience do you think is the strongest?
Okay, well, I plan on having. There are actually a bunch of strong. They're often called veridical near-death experiences, but what that means is there's good evidence that this was a real objective experience, and they involve different factors, like the person who dies and then comes back, or almost dies and then comes back with knowledge they didn't have before that can be verified. There are other ways that NDEs can be validated, but that's the principal way. And I plan to do a future episode of Mysterious World on this. One of the, in fact, currently the best book on veridical near-death experiences is called The Self Does Not Die. And it's by a researcher named Titus Rivas and several others. But the book is called The Self Does Not Die. And what they do in it is they give like over 100 accounts where someone died or almost died and then came back with knowledge or something else that that would confirm the objectivity of their experience, and that had witnesses. So it's not just someone came back and said all this stuff happened, but there were witnesses involved who could vouch for this. It's not like there have been some books that have been published. In fact, if you see a book about a near-death experience and the whole book focuses on one near-death experience, you want to be suspicious, because there's been a history of those being fake. An example would be there was a boy named Malarkey, ironically, who was the basis of a book called The Boy Who Came Back from Heaven. And he later denounced the book and said, my dad, I made it up to get attention, and my dad pushed it into this book, and I didn't understand what he was doing, and it's all fake. And the publisher, it was an evangelical publisher, pulled the book from the market. So anytime you see a book that focuses on one person's near-death experience, there's significant profit and attention motive there. And those have a track record of not being that reliable. So I don't put a lot of stock in what one person says long after the experience. But in The Self Does Not Die, what Rivas and the other researchers do is they look at cases where there was early documentation. Like someone comes back from getting their heart restarted and they immediately start talking to the hospital personnel before anything has been verified. And so you've got witnesses to the claim before the verification efforts are made. And there are a number of really good veridical NDEs in the book. And the weight of all of them, just experience after experience that can be documented this way is a powerful case. But if I was going to pick one, the one that I think is easiest to convey to, at least at the moment, the one I think that's easiest to convey to a person who's not a specialist in this area is the story of Maria Shu. This experience occurred a few decades ago up in the Northwest here in America. There was a migrant worker from Mexico named Maria who had cardiac arrest, and she was brought into the hospital by ambulance. So it's not like she got to walk around the hospital or anything. If memory serves, she also came in at night, and she cardiac arrested in the hospital. And she had an out-of-body experience, which is typical for NDEs. And in her out-of-body experience, she saw, the doctors and nurses working on her, but then she started moving around the rest of the hospital. And one of the things she saw in her out-of-body experience was a men's blue tennis shoe with scraping on one side of it and a shoelace tucked under it on a ledge outside a room on a different floor of the hospital. And then they get her heart restarted. She's back in her body, and instantly, now she didn't really speak English, so they had to find a hospital worker who knew some Spanish, and which at the time was harder than it would be now. And they got one of the hospital workers who knew some Spanish to come in and talk to her. She's really animated. She's insistent about, I just saw this shoe on a ledge outside a hospital room on a different floor. Can you go find it? Because she wanted to know, is my experience real or was that all a hallucination? So the hospital worker started going around, and on an upper floor of the hospital, this is not ground level, on an upper floor of the hospital, the nurse found a men's tennis shoe with blue with scuffing and a shoelace tucked underneath it, and was able to even get out on the ledge and retrieve the shoe and bring it back to Maria and say, you weren't hallucinating, here's the shoe. And so here we've got this veridical experience with knowledge that Maria didn't have before she had the cardiac arrest. We've got a witness who, because it wasn't Maria who went and found the shoe, it was this hospital worker, and we have the shoe itself. At least we did for a long time. The hospital worker eventually lost it when she moved, but there are photographs of the shoe because she did like TV interviews about this. So I think the story of Maria's shoe is a particularly compelling near-death experience in evidential terms.
Wow, John. Thank you very much for the question. It's an internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin this hour. Let's go to Matthew's question. If the Pope has the keys to heaven and hell, could the Pope Church canonize someone that God would not have allowed into heaven by ordinary means? But since the Church Pope utilized the authority of those keys, they now get in. What about the reverse? A just person going to hell because the Church invoked the keys of authority to condemn them.
Okay, so the image of Peter having the keys comes from Matthew chapter 16, and he's often pictured having the keys in Christian art. But this refers to the Pope being able to pass laws for the church here on earth. It does not mean that the Pope can include or exclude someone from heaven or hell. Pope doesn't control that. What controls that is the person's own choices. If the person either goes to heaven or doesn't go to heaven based on what the person did during their life. The Pope does not control that. Consequently, the Pope cannot include someone in heaven who otherwise wouldn't have gotten there, nor can he exclude someone from heaven who deserved to go there. The Church never canonizes anyone as going to hell. And then in terms of, I believe Matthew asked about, what do we know about canonizations? Like, are they certain? Whether or not saint canonizations are infallible is a disputed question. So that's kind of a sketch of this overall area. But the Pope is not going to get someone into heaven who is otherwise damned, and he's not going to exclude from heaven someone who is otherwise saved.
Matthew, thank you for the question. It's an internet Ask Me Anything. Jimmy Akin is our guest. We've got a whole bunch of questions from the internet, and there'll be a whole bunch more coming right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns to the parables, sermons, and conversations of Jesus Christ. Join special guests Scott and Kimberly Hahn, Dr. Ray Guarendi, and an all-star lineup of speakers September 26th through 29th. Spend time with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists and our special guests right here in beautiful San Diego. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
When it comes to Catholic teachings about Mary, there's one question we hear more than any other. Where is that in the Bible? The answer? Everywhere. In Bible Mary, the Mother of Jesus and the Word of God, Father John Weiss opens Scripture to reveal a Mary who has been hiding in plain sight. Order your copy of Bible Mary today at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
When the resurrected Jesus appeared to disciples on the road to Emmaus, they didn't recognize him until the breaking of the bread. The same is true today. In the Holy Eucharist, we really meet Jesus. In The Eucharist is Really Jesus, author Joe Heschmeyer explains how knowing Jesus in the Eucharist is the key to understanding all of Christian faith. Order your copy of The Eucharist is Really Jesus today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin is our guest. I'm Cy Kellett, your host. It's an internet Ask Me Anything. Lots of questions for Jimmy from the internet. And here comes more of them. Mary wants to know this. From what I understand, the Jesuits are not allowed to hold positions of authority or power. Is this true? And if so, did it change to permit Pope Francis to be Pope?
Okay, so there are Jesuits who have positions of authority and power, like the provincial of the Jesuit order. But Jesuits generally are not named as bishops. And the reason for that is there's a tradition in the Jesuit order going back to Ignatius of Loyola, their founder, who emphasized vocations as being a service and thus as a humble thing. He didn't want his members of his order clerical social climbing, trying to climb up the ranks and become bishops and cardinals and things like that. Having said that, generally they are not named bishops because they tend to decline when you ask them. But there are exceptions, and sometimes the Vatican will ask a Jesuit to become a bishop. And they did that for Jorge Bergoglio back in 1992. He was a Jesuit priest. He was asked to become a bishop, and he did. He accepted. He may have had to get permission from the Jesuit provincial, but or superior, but he became a bishop, and eventually he became a cardinal, and eventually he became Pope.
And there's that. Mary, thanks very much. This one comes from Keith. maybe better for a Weird Questions episode, but I recently had several blessed holy objects go missing around the house. And it occurred to me, what if it was demons? Is there anything to believe that demons couldn't move holy objects?
Well, demons are just bad angels, and angels have the ability of mind over matter. They can control matter with their mind since they don't have a physical body to control matter with. And so that's what's known as psychokinesis. So, bad angels have the same psychokinetic abilities as good angels, and thus there's nothing in principle that couldn't stop a demon from moving a holy object, But there is some reason to question whether they'd actually do that, because demons are disinclined to interact with the holy. That's one of the notable things about demons, and this is one of the diagnostic criteria in exorcism cases, is that they are averse to the holy. They really don't like hearing the name of Jesus or seeing pictures of Mary or things like that. And so if you've got, let's say, a blessed rosary or a blessed holy card or something like that, a demon's natural inclination is going to be to stay away from that because it's hard for them to interact with holiness. And in fact, that's my theory about what the principal mechanism of exorcism is. If it were as simple as demons obey rules and so you just put up an eviction notice on the person, they ought to leave immediately. But demons are rule breakers, and so it seems that something else, and they don't leave immediately. And so it seems that something else is going on in an exorcism. And one of the things that historically has been found is that that demons find various things the exorcist is doing to be painful. In fact, the 1614 rite of exorcism actually says that the exorcist should figure out, in the case of a particular demon, what's hurting it the most and do more of that. And so my theory of what makes exorcism work is it's essentially a holiness overload, that the demon can't stand this much holiness, and eventually it decides it's just going to leave to avoid the holiness. So it would be unexpected for a demon to be moving holy objects. Having said that, and this is something I always caution people, just because you could explain something by demons doesn't mean it's demons. So don't leap to the demon hypothesis. You need to consider the full range of possibilities for what could account for a phenomenon like objects being moved. In fact, there are multiple parapsychological phenomena that involve this. Classically, if an object appears when it wasn't there before, that's called apportation. If an object appears. If an object disappears from one location, it's called asportation. There are some more modern names, though. These days, one of the common names for this is disappearing object phenomena. They're also sometimes called JOTs. JOT, J-O-T-T, stands for just one of those things. It's this mysterious, this object moved, and it's just one of those things, so it's a JOT. Also, in poltergeist cases, which are commonly explained as not a spirit moving stuff, but as the subconscious of a person under stress moving stuff, poltergeist cases are famous for causing objects to move. So those are just parapsychological explanations in addition to demons. But then there's all the natural phenomena that can explain the same thing, like you moved it and you forgot, because humans have fallible memories, or someone else in your household moved it, or maybe your pet moved it, or maybe it rolled to a new location on its own, or maybe the wind blew it, or any number of different things. So in any investigation, you always want to start with the natural explanations, because normal explanations are more common than paranormal ones. And so you want to start with, could something natural explain this? You only want to resort to paranormal explanations, which would include demons, when none of the natural explanations are good. And you only want to go to demons when you have actual evidence it's demons, as opposed to something else.
Thanks, Keith. I hope you find them. Shannon asks this, Jimmy. She says this is from her 15-year-old. Is God alive both scientifically as well as theologically?
Well, so to answer the question, I need to know a little bit more about what does the 15-year-old mean by alive, because that could be taken to mean exist, or it could mean to have biological life. Well, okay, let's take the first of those options. Could we show that God exists both scientifically as well as theologically? Well, there are arguments for God's existence. Normally, these arguments are considered philosophical rather than scientific, but there are arguments for God's existence that incorporate material from the natural sciences. Some of these are, for example, what are known as design arguments that say it looks like the world was designed because it has these certain characteristics that you wouldn't expect to happen just randomly. It looks like our universe is intelligently designed to make life possible. And some of those factors are things that are sometimes called cosmological constants. They're quantities in nature, like the mass of the electron, how heavy electrons are, or the charge of the electron, or the strength of the gravitational force, or the strength of the electromagnetic force. And if you changed any of these by just a fraction, just a teeny little fraction, life would be impossible. And so there have been people who have made design arguments from constants in nature that science has discovered, and thus these arguments are incorporating scientific material to argue for the existence of God. So even though they're normally classified as philosophical, they do incorporate modern science. Now let's take the other possibility of if we're asking, does God have just spiritual life, or does he also have biological life as well? Well, Jesus is biologically alive. He's got a body. It's got functioning metabolism. So he's physically alive. He's biologically alive. But as far as we know, the Father and the Son don't have biological bodies, and so they would not be biologically alive, but they would be spiritually alive. They would have spiritual life. And in fact, they're the source, together with the Son, of all spiritual life.
And Shannon, thank you. That brings us to the break. It's an Ask Me Anything episode with all the questions coming from the internet. We'll continue with Internet Ask Me Anything with Jimmy Akin right after this on Catholic Answers Live.
You're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Proclaiming the faith, changing lives.
The year was 1999. The shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament of Our Lady of the Angels Monastery in Hanceville, Alabama is consecrated. Mother Angelica says, "The happiest day of my life was the day this church was dedicated."
To learn more about Mother Angelica's life and the history of EWTN, visit EWTN.com/Mother Angelica.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul? And that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come. At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
Welcome back to Catholic Answers Live. Jimmy Akin, our guests. It's an Internet Ask Me Anything episode, and Shannon asked a question from her 15-year-old before we went to the break, and this one comes from her 13-year-old, who asked, in the Skinwalker Ranch episode of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, there were 3 wolf-like activities, and one of them was a wolf-like creature running around in the horse pen. One thing I realized was that the description for the wolf was almost the same as the beast of...
Gévaudan.
Gévaudan. Okay. I'm glad I let you pronounce that. I wasn't going to come close. Do you think the beast could have been a skinwalker? They were both red, had puffy tails, head like a wolf, hyena-like bodies, and boar-like legs. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so just so people can listen to the relevant episodes, Skinwalker Ranch was episode 27, so you can go to mysterious.fm/27, and The Beast of Gévaudan was episode 297, so that's mysterious.fm/297. Skinwalker Ranch is a location in Utah, in the state of Utah, where a bunch of weird stuff has been reported, including some strange animals that look kind of like wolves, but are unusually big or have weird body proportions, like the one the 13-year-old mentions. The Beast of Gévaudan was a creature that appeared in the 1700s, in the mid-1700s, in France, in the Gévaudan region. And it violently attacked and killed like 100 people. And it was described as being like a wolf, but not a wolf. And there are more detailed descriptions. In terms of the question, could the beast that was seen on Skinwalker Ranch or the Beast of Gévaudan being a skinwalker? Well, a skinwalker is in various Native American tradition, a skinwalker is basically an evil wizard. And the evil wizard is, or, evil sorcerer, evil magic user, evil medicine man who's able to change his physical form and do bad stuff. And so that's where the name Skinwalker Ranch came from, because of the legends of local Native American groups of this area is in the path of one of these skinwalkers, one of these bad magic users. Could any of the beasts on Skinwalker Ranch have been a skinwalker in that sense? Well, it's going to depend on what you believe about magic and whether humans can genuinely change form. I'm very skeptical of that. I tend to think that although there are reports of people changing form, I have yet to find convincing evidence that can actually happen. So I would be skeptical of the idea of a literal skinwalker being involved in either of these incidents, either Skinwalker Ranch or the Gévaudan region. If a related question is asked, could the weirdly proportioned red wolf-like creature from Skinwalker Ranch have been the same thing as the Beast of Gévaudan was back in the 1700s? Well, it's possible, but that creature on Skinwalker Ranch did not display the most notable trait of the Beast of Gévaudan, which was it had no fear of humans and was very aggressive towards humans and would attack and kill humans. Whereas the beast that had the long legs but otherwise was kind of looked like a big red wolf on Skinwalker Ranch ran off when humans approached it. So that makes their behavior is different. And even if we don't have an exact way to compare them physically, the behavioral differences between the two of them suggest at least that they would be different things.
All right. Thanks for questions from both of the youngins, a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. Maybe we'll hear from you again, Shannon. Thank you. Let's go to this question from Matt. I remember a very helpful episode where you discussed the career of Dr. Stephen Greer. I have been very curious about what you know about the legitimacy of the UAP claims by Bob Lazar and David Grush.
And points to Cy Kellett for pronouncing Lazar correctly and not saying laser.
Oh, but that would be so cool. Oh, man, if his name was Bob Lazar, I would believe anything he says.
Yeah. Okay, so a lot of people won't be familiar with who these gentlemen are. Stephen Greer is a guy who's active on the UFO scene right now, and he claims to be able to telepathically summon flying saucers or UFOs or UAPs. And he even takes people out on expeditions where he'll claim to do this. And it's like, okay, we're all going to meditate together, and then the flying saucer is going to come. And in episode 194 of Mysterious World, I did an in-depth look at Stephen Greer and his claims, and I concluded he's a fraud. In fact, I have evidence that he hired an airplane to drop flares in the distance to fake UFO appearances. So I think he's a complete fraud. Bob Lazar is a gentleman who genuinely did apparently work at Area 51 back in the 1980s. And he was sort of the guy who brought Area 51 to public attention. He initially he did it anonymously, but his identity was quickly revealed. He was working with a journalist who was actually a good UFO journalist in Nevada, and they called attention to Area 51 and some of the strange aerial programs that they have working out there. Lazar went on to claim that he had worked on a project that involved trying to reverse engineer a crashed flying saucer. And he made various claims about it using element, I believe, 118. It was one of the highest elements. If it wasn't 118, it may have been one of the others in that general area on the periodic table. And he claimed things about his history that have not been confirmed. Like he claimed to have degrees from various places that have no record of him. Now, his argument is, well, the government disappeared my college records. So that's why there's no record of me having a degree from MIT or things like that. However, I am very skeptical of Bob Lazar's claims. And I actually did an episode on him. It's episode 22. So you can go to mysterious.fm/22 if you want to hear my reasons for doubting Bob Lazar's claims. I don't have concrete proof that he's a fraud the way I do for Stephen Greer, but I'm very skeptical. David Grush is a guy who has come to public attention only recently, only in the last year. He worked for the Defense Department's UFO investigation program, and he was a whistleblower because what he said was, I talked to various people as part of my investigative duties who said we have a bunch of crashed or abandoned flying saucers, including biological material, that are being hidden from congressional oversight. And he allegedly suffered reprisals for reporting this up the chain of command. He filed a whistleblower complaint that found his claims credible, that he did experience reprisals. And then he went public to talk about this, and he became famous for this. As far as I know, David Grush is an honest guy. I haven't seen any evidence that he's lying or faking, but all of the knowledge he has that he reports having of these matters is secondhand. It's just what other people have told him. And that means that the other people could be mistaken or they could be disinformation agents. And so I can't regard what David Grush has claimed as being reliable until we get independent verification that's more than just hearsay, or more than just what somebody else says. We need to see, okay, bring out the goods, show us these things if we've got them. They need to be under congressional oversight. And if they can be brought under congressional oversight, that would confirm what he says. But until such time as that happens, it's an interesting story, but I can't say it's anything more than a story.
All right, Matt, thank you very much for the question. Next time I will not miss the opportunity to pronounce the name Bob Lazar. I'm sorry. I didn't even see that one. This question comes from Dizzy Lizzy, which I do not know if that's a description or a name.
Dizzy Lizzy Cupcakery.
All right. All right, Dizzy Lizzy Cupcakery. How can we better understand the word belief with regards to God and our faith? And do Catholics and Protestants, specifically Lutherans, understand this idea of belief in God differently? Is it just about saying you know of God's existence and profess to others that you know and understand of his existence? Or is there a deeper understanding of belief in God, which also calls us to act or respond to this understanding of belief in him? If there is a deeper understanding or action of belief, where do we find this? In history and scripture, or in the actual definition or meaning of the word?
Okay, so the term belief or faith, there are a bunch of definitions for this. And in the biblical languages, belief and faith are the same thing. We have two words in English, but it's really the same concept in Greek and Hebrew and Latin. And the term gets used several different ways. In a kind of a minimal sense, belief is just intellectually assenting or agreeing with various theological truths like God exists. And that kind of faith will not save you. This is a point James makes in James chapter 2, where he says, you believe in God, you're doing good. But guess what? Even the demons believe in God, and yet they shudder at the prospect of his wrath. So merely intellectually agreeing with various theological truths will not save you. A step up from that is belief that incorporates trust in God, where we're trusting in God for example, salvation. And that's a theological virtue known as hope. So a step up from just intellectual assent or raw intellectual belief is a faith that incorporates hope or trust in God. Then a step up from that is an intellectual belief that incorporates hope or trust and love of God. And this is what's referred to in Catholic theology as formed faith, meaning faith formed or informed by charity. It's also what Paul refers to in Galatians 5:6 as faith working through love. And everybody agrees that if you've got formed faith, you're going to be saved. That's clearly the teaching of Scripture. If you have formed faith, you are going to be saved. And because you love God, you're going to be acting on that love of God. You're going to be doing stuff. You're going to be doing the good works that God wants you to do and that he'll ultimately reward you for. So if you have formed faith or faith working through love, you're definitely saved. The question and the point of controversy between some Protestants, not all Protestants, and Catholics is what if it doesn't have the love? Will it still save you if it's just trust coupled with belief? And you're going to find Protestants on different sides of that. Some Protestants are going to say, oh, all you got to do is believe in God and trust him. And you don't got to love him or anything like that or do good, nothing like that. On the other hand, other Protestants are going to say, no, Paul says what counts is faith working through love. You need the love too as part of your faith. In fact, the Protestant reformer John Calvin didn't even want to call something faith if it didn't include love. So you have a mix in the Protestant community on that. There has been a lot of discussion recently on the subject of salvation and belief and so forth with Lutherans and other Protestants that led in 1999 to the publication of a document called the Joint Declaration on the Doctrine of Justification, which was signed by the Lutheran World Federation and the Catholic Church. Subsequent to that, the World Methodist Council signed on, the World Anglican Consultative Council approved it, and the World Communion of Reformed Churches also signed on. So this is kind of a it's not universal, but it's a broadly ecumenical document that says, hey, basically we agree on these core elements about justification. If you'd like to read the document and have additional commentary on it, you could check out my book, The Drama of Salvation. There's also a short little book I did called 20 Answers, Faith and Works that goes into the basics of a lot of this. And so you can check out that too.
All that you can find at Catholic.com or probably just about anywhere where good Catholic books are sold. Thank you, Dizzy Lizzy Cupcakery, for the question. And there's more of these, so we'll have to do this again. I like doing them, Jimmy. You'll do this again with us, right? Yeah. Come back.
Oh, of course.
All right. That will do it for us this time. Check out if you're for all of your Catholic book needs and now Catholic gift needs and some fashion needs as well. You can find all that stuff at shop.catholic.com. Jimmy Akin, you can find all over the internet, but check out Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World at mysterious.fm. Thank you, Jimmy. We'll see you next time.
My pleasure.
All right, that'll do it for us. We'll see you next time right here, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.